Welcome to the Forgotten Cottage, a quiet place where old memories rest. Forgotten letters are waiting to be found, and every little sound from the past has a story to tell. Tonight, you are invited to step inside an old cottage hidden among the trees. The fire is warm, the wind is gentle, and somewhere in the silence, an old story is waiting for you. Get comfortable, close your eyes, and let the journey begin. Story 1. The Lantern in the Forgotten Cottage. The cottage had been empty for many years. People in the nearby village said nobody had lived there since the last owner disappeared into the mountains. The roof was covered with moss. The wooden windows were covered with dust. And the garden that once bloomed beautifully had slowly returned to the wild. But when Clara received the old letter telling her that the cottage belonged to her, she felt something strange. She had never heard of the place. She had never met the previous owner. And yet, the letter carried a name she recognized. Her grandmother. The letter was simple. Dear Clara, there is a cottage waiting for you beyond the old forest road. Inside, you will find something that has been waiting for many years. Do not be afraid of the silence. Some memories simply need someone to listen. Clara read the letter 3 times. She wondered why her grandmother had never mentioned the cottage. But curiosity was stronger than her questions. So, on a quiet autumn morning, she followed the old road into the forest. The journey took almost an hour. The trees grew taller as she walked. The sound of the village slowly disappeared, until finally, between the golden leaves, she saw it, the Forgotten Cottage. It looked exactly like something from an old storybook. A small wooden house, a stone chimney, a garden gate covered with vines. Clara unlocked the door. The moment she stepped inside, she felt warmth. Not the warmth of a fire, something else. Like the feeling of returning to a place she had somehow known before. The cottage smelled of old books and dried flowers. On the table near the window sat a small lantern. It was glowing. Clara stopped. There was no candle inside, no oil, no electricity. But the lantern shone softly, filling the room with golden light. Beside it was a note. Some lights are kept alive by memories. Clara touched the lantern carefully, and for a moment, she thought she heard a voice, not a frightening voice. A gentle one, like someone whispering from far away. Welcome home. Clara looked around the empty room. Nobody was there. Only the quiet sound of the wind outside. She smiled. Maybe the cottage was not as empty as everyone believed. That evening, Clara cleaned the old living room. She opened the curtains. She placed flowers in a vase. And as the sun disappeared behind the trees, the lantern continued to glow. For the first time in many years, the Forgotten Cottage was no longer forgotten, and Clara began to wonder. What other stories were hidden inside these old wooden walls? The next morning, Clara woke up to the sound of rain. Soft drops touched the old windows. The forest outside was covered in mist. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she saw the wooden ceiling above her. The old cottage, her new home. She walked downstairs and noticed something unusual. The lantern was still glowing. It had been burning all night. Clara carefully picked it up. There was a small symbol carved into the bottom. A tiny tree with 3 branches. She recognized it. It was the same symbol that appeared on her grandmother's old necklace. A necklace Clara had kept since childhood. She always wondered why her grandmother treasured such a simple thing. Now she began to understand. Maybe the cottage was connected to her family in ways she never knew. Clara spent the morning exploring the rooms. The cottage was small, but every corner seemed to hold a memory. There was an old piano near the fireplace, a bookshelf filled with handwritten journals, and a small room at the back of the house that had remained locked. The key was nowhere to be found. But on the door, someone had written, "Open only when you are ready." Clara smiled. It was strange, but somehow it felt comforting. She did not force the door open. Instead, she made tea, sat beside the window, and listened to the rain. Day passed. Then weeks. Clara slowly became used to the cottage. She repaired the garden, she cleaned the old books. She learned the sound of every wooden floorboard. Some floors creaked. Some windows rattled when the wind blew. The cottage had its own language, and Clara was learning how to listen. One evening, while reading one of the old journals, she found something unexpected. A page with her grandmother's handwriting, "My dearest friend. If someone finds this cottage after I am gone, I hope they understand. This place was never abandoned. It was simply waiting." Clara held the journal close. She continued reading. "I came here many years ago when I needed a quiet place. The cottage helped me remember who I was. It reminded me that even forgotten things can still have meaning." Clara looked toward the lantern. Its golden light moved gently, like a small flame breathing. She finally understood. The lantern was not magical. Not in the way people imagine magic. It was something simpler, a reminder. A small light saying, someone was here, someone cared, someone loved this place. That night, Clara slept peacefully. And for the first time, she dreamed of her grandmother. Not as she remembered her in old age, but as a young woman walking through the garden, laughing beside the cottage. Before leaving, her grandmother turned around. She looked directly at Clara and said, "Thank you for coming back." When Clara woke up, the rain had stopped. The forest was quiet, and beside the lantern was a new note. Only 3 words, "Keep the light." Clara smiled. She knew then. The Forgotten Cottage had chosen its new keeper. Story 2. The Letter Beneath the Wooden Floor. Many years before Clara arrived at the cottage, another story had already begun. A story hidden beneath old wooden boards. A story about a letter and a promise that was never forgotten. The cottage once belonged to an old man named Thomas. He lived there alone. The villagers often saw him walking through the forest, carrying books, collecting flowers, and leaving small pieces of bread for birds near the garden. People thought he was lonely. But Thomas never felt alone. The cottage was filled with memories. Every chair, every painting, every little corner had a story. One winter morning, while repairing the floor near the fireplace, Thomas discovered something. A loose wooden board. Underneath, it was a small wooden box. Inside the box was a letter. The paper was old. The ink was faded, but the words were still clear. To the person who finds this, I hope you are sitting somewhere warm. I hope the fire is burning. And I hope you are not rushing through life. Something so mas mailed. He continued reading. The letter was written by someone named Eleanor, a woman who had lived in the cottage many years before. She wrote about the forest, the garden, the quiet mornings, and a friendship she had with someone who lived far away. Someone she had not seen in decades. The letter ended with one sentence. I left something behind for my oldest friend. If you find this letter, perhaps you can help it find its way home. Thomas wondered. Who was this friend, and what had Eleanor left behind? The next morning, he began searching, not because he wanted an adventure, but because the letter felt important, like a small voice from the past asking to be heard. He searched the attic, the garden, the old shelves, until finally he found another clue, a faded photograph. Two young people standing beside the cottage. One was Eleanor, the other was a man holding a small wooden music box. On the back of the photo were written only 5 words: "The song we promised." Thomas held the photograph for a long time. He wondered about the two people. Where étaient? What promise had they made, and why had the music box been left behind? The cottage seemed to become quieter that evening. The rain tapped gently against the windows. The old fireplace warmed the room. Thomas placed the photograph beside the lantern and began searching through Eleanor's old belongings. He found boxes filled with memories, old postcards, pressed flowers, small drawings. Each item carried a piece of a life that had already passed. But among all these things, there was no music box, not yet. For several days, Thomas searched. He walked through the village. He asked the older residents if they remembered Eleanor. Most people only knew small pieces of her story. But one elderly woman remembered. She said Eleanor had a friend named Samuel. They grew up together. They promised that no matter where life took them, they would always return to the cottage. Thomas listened carefully. Did Samuel come back? The woman looked toward the forest. I don't know. Some promises take longer than a lifetime to keep. Those words stayed with Thomas. The next morning, he returned home. He walked through the garden. The flowers had begun to bloom again after the long winter. And near the old tree behind the cottage, he noticed something. A small stone. It had the same symbol as the lantern. A tree with 3 branches. Thomas moved the stone. Underneath was a tiny wooden compartment. Inside was the music box. It was old. The surface was scratched. But when Thomas opened it, a gentle melody played, a quiet song. A song that felt familiar. On the bottom of the box was another note. Eleanor, if I could not return, I hope someone kind finds this. Tell the cottage I remembered. Thomas sat beneath the tree. He listened to the music, and he understood. The letter was never about finding an object. It was about remembering someone. The next day, Thomas brought the music box to the village. He found Samuel. He was an old man living quietly at the edge of the town. When Thomas showed him the music box, Samuel became silent. Tenesma led the peaceful forever. Thomas handed it to him. She wanted you to have it. Samuel looked at the cottage in the distance. I always planned to return. He paused, but life moves differently than we expect. That afternoon, Samuel visited the cottage. He sat beside the fireplace. He listened to the music. And for the first time in many years, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. The cottage had kept the promise. It had waited patiently until the right person. And from that day on, the cottage was never just a house. It became a place where forgotten things could finally return home. Story 3, the garden that remembered everything. Behind the cottage was a garden, not a perfect garden. Not the kind found in paintings. It was wild. Flowers grew wherever they wanted. Old trees stretched their branches toward the sky. Small paths disappeared beneath the grass. But there was something special about it. Every person who visited the garden felt the same thing, a feeling that the garden was listening. Years later, a young woman named Lily came to the cottage. She was searching for a quiet place. The world outside felt too loud, too fast. She wanted somewhere she could think. Somewhere she could rest. The old cottage was exactly what she needed. When she arrived, the garden immediately caught her attention. She spent her first morning walking between the flowers. She noticed something unusual. Every plant had a small wooden tag, and on each tag was a name. Not the name of the flower, the name of a person. There was Anna, James, Rose, Michael. Hundreds of names. Lily wondered why. She searched the cottage library, and there she found an old notebook. The first memories Lily Openedit. Inside were stories, not just names. Stories. A person who planted a tree after finding hope again. A child who grew flowers for a lost parent. A traveler who rested at the cottage and finally decided where to go next. The garden remembered everyone, not because it had magic, but because someone had cared enough to write their stories down. Lily continued reading, and slowly she realized something. The garden was not holding on to the past, it was celebrating it. Every flower was proof that something beautiful had once happened, even if nobody remembered anymore. That evening, Lily sat beside the garden. The wind moved gently through the leaves. The cottage lights glowed warmly behind her, and she thought, maybe everyone leaves something behind. A memory, a kindness, a small moment, something that continues growing, just like a flower. The next morning, Lily woke up early. The cottage was quiet. The kind of quiet that felt peaceful instead of empty. She made tea and walked outside. The garden looked different in the morning light. The flowers moved gently with the wind. The leaves shimmered after the night rain. Lily continued reading the old notebook. The last pages were blank. Hundreds of empty pages waiting. She wondered why. Then she found a small sentence written at the bottom. The garden grows with every story that is shared. Lily thought about those words. For years, she had believed that her own story was not important. She had moved from place to place, never staying long enough to belong anywhere. But maybe she was wrong. Maybe every person had a story worth keeping. So Lily took a pen, and she began writing. She wrote about the morning she arrived. She wrote about the old cottage. She wrote about the peaceful feeling she had found there. She wrote about the garden. Days became weeks. Lily stayed longer than she planned. She repaired broken fences. She planted new flowers. She cared for the old trees, and slowly, the garden changed. Not completely. It remained wild. It remained imperfect. But now, there were new flowers growing, new memories. One afternoon, Lily discovered something hidden beneath a large tree, a small wooden box. Inside was a collection of letters, all written by previous visitors. They shared their thoughts, their hopes, their dreams. Some were happy, some very sad but honest. The final letter was addressed to the future keeper of the garden. It said, "If you are reading this, you have probably discovered the same thing we did. A place is not special because it is perfect. A place becomes special because someone cares for it." Lily folded the letter carefully. She placed it back inside the box. And she added one more letter. Eraune. The garden had remembered others. Now, it would remember her two-did story for the last winter at the cottage. Winter arrived slowly. The forest became silver. The trees rested under a blanket of snow. The small cottage stood quietly among the white landscape. Inside, the fireplace burned warmly. A soft glow filled every room. Years had passed since the cottage was first forgotten, and many people had found their way there. But one winter evening, someone new arrived. An old woman carrying a small suitcase. Her name was Clara. She stood at the gate, looking at the cottage. She had not been there for many years. She was the original owner's granddaughter. She came back because she had received a letter. A letter written long ago. The message was simple. The cottage is waiting. Clara opened the door. The familiar scent of wood and books filled the room. Everything felt different, but also exactly the same. On the table was the old lantern, still glowing. Clara smiled. She remembered being young. She remembered her grandmother telling her stories. Stories about a cottage in the woods, a place where people could rest, a place where lost things could be found again. She walked through every room, the old piano, the bookshelf, the garden. Everything carried memories. That night, Clara sat beside the fireplace. She opened an old journal. The final pages were written by her grandmother, unwind, Roman Berti. The cottage was never meant to belong to one person. It belongs to every heart that needs a quiet place. Clara read the words slowly, and she understood. The cottage was not about the past. It was about connection. Every visitor, every story, every little moment had become part of the house. The next morning, Clara opened the windows. Fresh winter air entered the rooms. She cleaned the shelves. She prepared tea, and she placed a new notebook on the table. The first page had one sentence: "Leave your story here." Years later, travelers would still find the cottage. Some would come searching for answers. Some would come because they were tired. Some would simply follow the old forest road. And every person would find the same thing: a warm fire, a quiet room, a place to breathe, a place where forgotten memories could live again. Story 5. The room behind the old bookshelf. Many years after the cottage found its new keeper, another visitor arrived. Her name was Amelia. She did not come to the cottage because she was searching for an adventure. She came because she needed a quiet place. Sometimes life became too loud, too many voices, too many questions, too many things that needed to be decided. And Amelia only wanted somewhere peaceful, a place where she could sit or drink tea and listen to the sound of the rain. The old forest road led her to the cottage. In the evening, the trees were already turning golden. The air smelled like fallen leaves. And when she reached the wooden gate, she noticed something. The cottage looked exactly as people described old simple. Warm, the lindor milias mailed. She remembered the stories. Everyone in the nearby village knew about the cottage. Some said it was a place where people found forgotten memories. Some said the house seemed to know when someone needed it. Amelia never believed those stories. Not completely, until she stepped inside. The cottage was quiet, but not empty. A fire was already burning. A cup of tea was waiting on the table, and beside it was a small piece of paper. "Welcome, Amelia." She froze. She looked around. "Hello?" No answer. Only the gentle sound of the fire. Amelia picked up the note. Under the first sentence were more words. "Do not worry. The cottage has always known the names of those who arrive." She laughed softly. It was strange, but somehow comforting. She placed her bag down and decided not to think about it too much. That night, Amelia explored the cottage. She found the old piano, the garden journal, the wooden box of letters. All the things left behind by previous visitors. Every room had a story, but there was one thing she noticed. The bookshelf in the living room was different. One shelf was empty, completely empty. While every other shelf was full of books, Amelia walked closer. She touched the wooden surface and felt a small movement, a click. She stepped back. The bookshelf slowly moved. Behind it was a hidden door. Amelia stood there silently. The room behind the bookshelf was small. Inside was a single chair, a desk, and hundreds of letters. The walls were covered with notes from people who had visited the cottage. Some were written decades ago, some were recent. Every visitor had left something behind. A thought, a memory, a wish. Amelia picked up one letter. It said, "To the next person who finds this room. If you are reading this, you probably needed the cottage too." She smiled. Because it was true, she opened another letter. "Today I learned that being lost does not always mean you are going the wrong way." Another one said, "Some places do not fix your problems. They simply give you enough quiet to find your own answers." Amelia sat at the desk. For the first she felt calm. She took out a piece of paper and began writing. She wrote about her journey, her worries, her hopes, everything she had kept inside. The room was silent. The candle beside the desk flickered gently. And somehow, writing felt easier there. When she finished, she folded the letter, but before she placed it among the others, she noticed something, a very old letter at the bottom of the pile. The handwriting looked familiar. She picked it up. The first line made her stop. "To whoever finds this room, I hope you understand why the cottage waits." It was written by the first owner, the person who built the cottage. The letter continued. "This house was never created to hold people forever. It was created to give them a moment. A moment to remember, a moment to heal, a moment to continue." Amelia read those words again and again, because they felt like they were written directly for her. The next morning, she opened the windows. The forest was bright. The birds were singing. The cottage looked the same. But Amelia felt different. Before leaving, she placed her letter inside the hidden room. Then she closed the bookshelf and walked toward the door. The lantern was still glowing, waiting for the next visitor. Because that was the secret of the Forgotten Cottage. It never kept people. It simply welcomed them. And when they were ready, it helped them find their way home. Thank you for spending this quiet night at the Forgotten Cottage. May your dreams be peaceful. May your heart feel lighter. And may you always find your way home. Good night.